Hello and welcome back. Come sit for a spell and join me round the cauldron as I sit and have a chat with witchy influencers, authors, and regular people alike. Today, I'm sitting down to talk with Caireann of Hearth and Besom to chat about Slavic American witchcraft and her multicultural practice. Once again, there was an issue with Zoom not liking my microphone, so there is some feedback and echo when I speak sometimes. It's not there all the time, and it doesn't impede the conversation, but if you struggle to hear what I say and still want to view the interview, please find the transcript in the description and the show notes. I promise the next episode will be better. All right, let's get into it. Right, so thank you so much for joining me today for this podcast here around the cauldron. Carrie, I'm so excited to talk to you. I know we've talked on Instagram several times before, and I've been following you for a while. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you. What's an honor for me to be here. I'm just a little account, but I'm really excited to be here to talk with you today.
It's funny that you say that because I think my account is smaller than yours. But whatever, the numbers are inconsequential. So for anyone that doesn't know you, would you like to give a little bit of information about yourself, your background, who you are, that kind of thing?
Sure. So I go by Caireann. Some people call me Hearth because my account is Hearth and Besom. Mm-hmm. I am a Slavic American folk practitioner of magic, and I am really into ethnographic studies. I dabble in kitchen magic. I'm definitely not a contestant for the British Bake Off, but and most of what I've learned is come from my grandmother on my dad's side.
Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about that because you are a Slavic American practitioner, right?
Yes.
So where do those practices come from? And can you explain a little bit for people that don't know, like what that entails, the area of the world that these practices come from?
Sure. So when you say Slavic, that really encompasses a whole, and there's this whole big discussion as to whether it's Eastern or Central Europe. People from those areas sometimes get very sensitive about whether you say they're Eastern or Central, but it's that Central to Eastern area of Europe that would encompass Yugoslavia, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Ukraine, Russia, and I did say Poland, right? Those areas in there. So those are all your Slavic languages and Slavic people. Sometimes the people in Bavaria get thrown into that mix too. I don't know enough about that type of the folk witchcraft to say yes or no, but it generally gets thrown in there as well. The Germanic people as well. So it's that area. And my family is from what would be in Slovakia, probably like almost southeast, from an area where around Nastianovic, Petrovce, that area of Slovakia.
Okay. So it sounds like the term Slavic is like the term Celtic. Celtic is not just like one country or anything. It covers a lot of different places and a lot of different peoples. So Slavic is because Celtic is the language, like the language family. So is the word Slavic similar?
Yes. So I don't, and a lot of people don't know this about me, but one of the things that I do for a career is I teach language. And when I teach language, I explain to people that there are pockets or umbrellas that cover certain languages, like Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. These are all what they call Romance languages, and not like romance, like, they come from the Roman. And then, so your Slavic languages all have the same base to them. So that's why you listen to people who speak Ukrainian or speak Polish or speak Slovak or speak Czech. It sounds similar to the ear because it all has that same base to it. And that's why they group them all together.
Oh, okay. That makes total sense to me. I hope that makes sense to everybody else. Because it's something that seems to escape a lot of people. They think like Celtic is just this one area, but it's not based on a landmass. It's based on a language system.
Right.
So your practice comes from like your family, like historically or more recent? So
Okay, so my I live in the United States. I live in the East Coast of the United States, and we're such a big, huge melting pot that this is an experience that a lot of people outside of the country have a hard time understanding. I mean, my husband's from Colombia. He is 100% Colombian. Like there is no mixing there. I mean, if you go back through his roots, like way, way back, you know, he has ancestors in Spain and indigenous roots. But for them, he's a Colombian. That's it. For those of us that live in the States, we generally come from mixed families. So on my mom's side of the family, my mom is a half Polish and a little bit of Irish. And then my dad's family is 100% Slovak. So most of what I know I learned from my dad's mom, who, if you follow me, you'll see me refer to Baba. That means grandmother in Slovak. Many countries will say baba, babushka, you know, and people think babushka like what you put the head veiling you put on your head, but babushka is it's like Grammy. It's like a very endearing term to say grandmother. So most of what I've learned comes from folk tradition from my dad's mom, who would pull me on the side when, you know, I was alone with her and teach me things, or, you know, like we would be cooking or doing something in the kitchen and, you know, she would do something or she'd say, don't do that. Or if I had nightmares, she'd tell me what to do and this type of thing. But then again, on my mom's side of the family, it wasn't as much that I learned from them, but I did learn things like, you know, to not remove the iron keys from the doors because there's a specific spirit that we know now causes, sleep paralysis, but in those days they thought this was a female spirit who came through the keyholes at night, and so they would keep their iron keys in the door to keep her from coming in. And one time I was little, I was playing and I removed them, and I got in a lot of trouble. They were like freaking out, like, no, you put those back and you leave those there. So this is where like the basis of what I learned came from. But interestingly enough, like people say, well, what kind of a witch are you? Because there's so many different terms for witch in different languages. And I say, listen, I'll be honest with you. Like I'll go by but I wouldn't really put a label on it. If I ever called my Baba a witch, she'd probably smack me.
yeah, it's funny that happens because a lot of what we see is similar to what we do. Like we see other people doing things like this, but we're the ones that put the label of witch on them because it's similar. But like, don't call them a witch because they definitely would not like that.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, it was something that I was having a conversation with the Latin practitioner. And she said to me, oh yeah, that's very similar in our culture, where I said that in many of the towns, all the towns had your town witch who you would go to for healing, you know, mostly for healing and, you know, for other spells and things. But you didn't claim the title witch. This was something that was like, it was like being knighted. Like they gave you the title. Like once the town decided you were the town witch, then you could accept that title. You didn't walk around calling yourself that.
Yeah, it's so interesting how the words are different and like have different meanings around different places in the world. You mentioned that you live in the United States and you are practicing these cultural practices from outside the United States that you learned from your family. In my personal experience, I am kind of doing something similar because my practice is heavily focused on like the Irish gods as a pagan, but also I am learning more about Irish folk practices. My family didn't come to the, didn't, what am I trying to say? My family came to the United States from Ireland more than like 200 or 300 years ago. So you know, going back several generations, my family has been in the United States. So I'm trying to learn and connect with those roots from like several generations removed. And I have to be really careful about claiming specific practices from Ireland as my own because I didn't grow up in the culture and I don't really have a claim to them unless like somebody teaches them to me. And also because Ireland isn't they're still a living culture, and these things are still believed and practiced in Ireland today. They might look a little different, but they're dissimilar, or in some cases, they're exactly the same. So, how does that sort of work for you as in terms of like cultural practices as an American um, from like another part of the world?
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's definitely a question that comes up, especially, the world has become so small with, having the connectivity through the internet, and especially during the lockdown, when everybody kind of took to online, was when I made a lot of my friends from overseas. And it was really helpful to me to help me expand the way that I thought about things, because initially, when I took to Instagram, I was kind of like, okay, well, which path am I going to follow? I do have some distanced Irish ancestry, but I really don't know a whole lot about that, 2 generations removed from that. And so, I said, well, I'm going to go with what I know. I'm going to go with what I do. I'm going to go with what Baba taught me. And I went online and I put, on my reels and things that I was a Slavic witch. And there was a lot of backlash about that from people who lived over there, that you can't claim to be a Slavic witch. And initially I was like, you don't know how I grew up, so how are you going to tell me? I'm not somebody who, is just now discovering, who my Slovak and Polish relatives and ancestries and practices were. I mean, I grew up in this. The area that I grew up in was a little town a mile by a mile long, and it was all Slovak and Polish people who spoke the languages and carried on the traditions as if they were still over in Europe. So what was interesting was that my dad, being a school teacher, we were always there. I mean, we were there on the weekends. We were there as soon as the holidays, we were there the whole time. As soon as the summer hit, my mother wasn't working, so we were there. This is who I grew up with. And so, I mean, it wasn't until I was like in 6th or 7th grade that we really started to stay where we live now, which was 3 hours away from them. And initially I had this like feeling of I was being removed from my culture, so to speak, because I was used to hearing the language and the traditions, and everything was done as if we were in Europe. So I would get offended when people would say, oh, you can't claim to be a Slavic witch. But then the more I thought about it, the more I said, you know what, in a way, I can't claim to be a Slavic witch, because I haven't lived in that country. So I've had the environment around me, which is, I've been very blessed to have, but I didn't live over there. And the more I thought about it, the more I said, yeah, no, I need to put down that I'm a Slavic American witch with this experience, but at the same time, I'm living in America. So it's like the difference between claiming citizenship and claiming ethnicity, which is something that I think a lot of us here in the States have. That's our experience. We have the ethnicity, the lineage, but we don't actually live in the country. So we can't say what the experience is like living on Slovak land and, with Slovak people and that type of thing. I can only claim my ethnicity. And that's where, that's how I, have shaped my practice there.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. And it's really something that I've personally struggled with, as far as like emotionally feeling connected to a specific culture and land that I've never visited, that I don't have any living relatives who would be able to tell me about their experiences while living there. And it's funny to think about American culture, because what the heck is American culture? And
right.
like, so it's my daughter and I were watching a TV show, and they were talking about Bollywood movies. And she had no idea what a Bollywood movie was. So we looked into Bollywood movies, and then that got us talking about India and the Hindu faith and their practices. And I said, wait, let me show you this. So we looked at videos on YouTube of Holi, the Festival of Colors.
Oh, yes.
And in talking about the culture there, she even was like, well, what's our culture? What do we do? And I
Right.
said, you know what? That's the $1 million question,
Yeah.
because our culture is very Christianized. And when our family came to the United States, they had to assimilate. And for like me specifically, obviously, you can't talk about anybody else. Um, Being so far removed through all of that assimilation, it's like I can pick up bits and pieces of things that I've been taught or things that I have seen
Mm-hmm.
that my family would have no idea that they are like folkloric practices from Ireland that I've personally discovered that
Mm-hmm.
they have talked about. I, if I'm remembering correctly, there was something about the willow tree, and um, if a willow tree on your property dies, that means that someone in your family is going to die.
Right.
And I remember being a kid, I love willow trees. I love the idea of like all of the leaves and stuff coming down and going into like a hidden little place
Yeah.
next to the trunk of the tree. I wanted to plant a willow tree at my Nana's house. And my Nana's like, no, we're not planting a willow tree because it's bad luck. And if the willow tree dies, somebody in your family is going to die. And it was only recently with the internet that I was able to put those pieces together, that that's something that's been passed down,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody really knows where it came from, because
Right.
it's just something that they believe and have believed this entire time. So it's that, I don't know, it's just, it's interesting, but it also makes me really sad.
Yeah. Yeah, along those lines, what's funny is that, my mom has more Polish influence than Irish, and yet a lot of the expressions that she uses, I really love ethnographic studies, which is like the study of the cultures of the peoples.
Mhm.
Where did this come from, kind of a thing.
Yeah,
And I've researched a lot of the expressions that my mom uses are very Irish.
that's so funny.
Like one of her favorites is, like when something is when somebody gets their comeuppance, so to speak, she'll say, how do you like them apples?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
That's a really Irish expression,
Is it?
and
I
it's like,
had no idea.
yeah. So yeah, and there are a lot of expressions like that I've adopted, just from growing up with her being my mom. And sometimes my kids will be like, Mom, where do you like, what does that even mean? And I'll be like, well, and they're like, no, I don't know.
Yeah, it's, oh my gosh. I had no idea that that phrase was Irish, because that's
Yeah.
something that my whole family says. How do you like
Uh-huh.
them apples? Like,
Exactly.
ha
And
ha.
we use those expressions like, like everybody should just understand what that means. But it's such a colloquialism. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness.
Uh-huh.
So what is what is the difference, if you want to talk about it, from like what you practice versus like the native faith of the area that your practice comes from?
Oh, sure. So similar to the idea that, you're a Celtic pagan, the people in the Slavic countries over the last couple of centuries have really kind of been trying to bring back the native faith, which predominantly is Rodnovery, and it has to do with the pantheon of Slavic gods, which I find really fascinating because I grew up with my dad being a history teacher. I was the nerdy kid that used to sneak into his office and would read all his textbooks. So, I had this fascination with pantheons of pagan gods from the time I was little. I learned about the Romans, the Greeks, and the Egyptian gods.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I got older, I was really interested, and I started thinking like, well, what about our people? I'm sure that they had their pantheon of gods too. And so this whole movement of Rodnovery is the idea of bringing back the old faith because, they were, colonized by the Christians. And, they brought in, so these areas are predominantly, the predominant faith is Christianity. And, it's pretty much an Orthodox Christianity where you see the cross with the three bars.
Mm-hmm.
So you have your Byzantine Catholics and you have your Orthodox Catholics in those areas. But recently, over the last couple, centuries, you've had this resurgence of the natural faith of Roddenberry, which is bringing back the old pagan gods. One of the interesting things that gets brought up to me when people find out that I'm a Slavic witch is right away there's this question of, are you a white supremacist? Are you a racist? Because unfortunately, what we've seen with the resurgence of the native faith is that some of these groups are finding their way into these circles of the native faith, and it's very important to distinguish the fact that one has nothing to do with the other. It's just an unfortunate case of some of these people being attracted to it because of the fact that it has these roots. It's like, I think the same questions come up when you talk to people who have, Nordic and Viking background as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that the heathen community really has to pay extra attention to the people that they let in their groups, but also to like the view of the wider population, because it's very heavily tied to white supremacy. There's even like a specific church, the AFA, the Ancestral Folk Assembly, that in their core tenets, it specifically states like by people of European descent or something like that.
Right.
We mean white people, and that's like the only people that they let in their community. Right. And it's ridiculous. And
yeah, I agree.
Like, it's one of those things that I have a lot of feelings about, but I'm not very good at putting words together for those kinds of things. So I can just use like my facial expressions and just like,
yeah. Well, it's a fine line that you have to walk when you talk about these things to not offend people. Mm-hmm. But if you look at a lot of the Slavic countries over there, like there's this one artist that I particularly enjoy her music, but she came out in one of her videos and she had cornrows, and I was like, what the hell's going on here? Hello, cultural appropriation. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And, like, she was just like, it's just a hairstyle and I like it. And I was just like, no, it's not just a hairstyle.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of, I feel like it's almost like a lot of the understanding behind these things has not yet reached some people over in that part of the world, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But there's just, it's a process of education. You just have to keep educating people and saying, no, that's not okay. Do you know where that came from? Do you know why that's appropriating? Kind of a thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hopefully with the better access to the internet and better access to information, that sort of education will continue, because there are many places in the world that still don't have that ease of access to information.
True.
So maybe in the future, but maybe at the end of my generation and in my daughter's generation or whatever, it will be better. I mean, I could hope for now, but the cynical side of me knows that that's probably not going to happen.
I have great hope for Gen Z.
Yes, great hope for Gen Z, great hope for Gen Alpha even.
Because, I know. I'm still learning all the letters that go with that alphabet.
Oh my gosh. And like the only reason that I know anything about Gen Alpha is because my daughter's considered Gen Alpha. And they've been nicknamed like the honey badgers because they give zero.
Oh, okay.
Like they don't care.
Yeah.
So hope for the future and wish for the best for that, I suppose. Cool. So what does your wheel of the year look like, so to speak? Because if I'm remembering right, you have your cultural practice, your Slavic American practice, but you are also learning more about your husband's culture, right?
Oh, yeah, that's we have a dish in the Slavic countries called goulash, and most people have heard of it. It's basically a stew where, traditionally they just throw whatever leftover meat you had in there and, vegetables and things and mixed it up. And that's kind of how I refer to my practice. My practice really is kind of like a goulash. I mean,
That's so funny. I love making
Because
goulash.
look, I mean, like, yeah, now I'm going to be, it's raining here, so that would be the perfect dish for today. Um, how can I put this? It's very interesting. I've always tried to keep a balance in the house, being that my husband is like actually from Colombia. Like he was born there. His family is all over there. Most of them are over there. We go back and forth between here and Colombia, at least once or twice a year. Mm-hmm. It's not like he's like, 2 or 3 generations removed. And so if we don't include his traditions, he's okay. I mean, he is living, breathing 100%. Like I think he bleeds the colors. Mm-hmm. So I always try to maintain a balance because one of the things I really love about his culture is that they are such a folk culture and very artisan in their jewelry and the way they dress and they act and all of that. And there's so much tradition over there. So Colombia, for those people that might not know about their history, they have the indigenous population, and they had the slave movement over there. So they have Black population, and then they had the conquistadors from Spain come in, and that's why they speak Spanish. So you have this mix. You have people who look like Sofia Vergara and James Rodriguez and John Leguizamo, who look like like me or you, with more of the Spaniard influence. And then you have people who look like my husband, who has a very, very, if you've seen my husband in photos or reels, he tends more towards the indigenous side. And yet I posted a picture years ago on my Facebook from Christmas time of me with my mother-in-law, and people thought she was my mom. So you have this, or if you see his dad, like pictures of his dad, you'd be like, his dad looks Black. Mm-hmm. Well, he was, so you have this like beautiful mixing of these three, different streams of people coming together to form all different kinds of folk traditions over there. Now, I know that there are other Latin practitioners that would agree with me. We've had these conversations. There's a saying in a lot of these countries, because Catholicism came in and is very much the predominant religion in these countries, that how does it go? I have to think how to say this in English. The biggest, the most faithful Catholics on Sunday are the biggest witches during the week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard something similar.
Yeah, in most everybody's household, there's a back room where, you've got, herbs burning and glasses of water and cinnamon sticks in a jar and, orange peels and, lentils and green apples and things and all kinds of workings going on in that back room, but on Sundays we're all in church, kind of a thing. So, so a lot of the way that I work with my practice is to include things that my sister-in-laws and my mother-in-law have taught me. And it's very much an oral tradition over there. If you go online and you search for books on Colombian magic, I'm listening to one on Audible right now that has come out recently called The Black Book of Witchcraft of Colombia. And I had heard a lot of buzz about it, but I hadn't, I didn't know the content. So I start listening to it and I'm like, this is not a book about spells. Colombia, and if you go back in my reels, you'll see last year I was there for a month. I had some necessary surgery done, and I stayed with my sister-in-law. So I was in Colombia for Samhain, and it was horrible. It was horrible because Colombia still has this like fear of witches. Mm-hmm. If you say the word bruja or brujo or hechicera over there, they're like, I think I posted something around that time that somebody thought that they had seen a witch running across the rooftops, and that was like a lynching. It was scary. The people were like going after this person with like flammables and things like this and knives and stuff, trying to catch the witch because, they were afraid of what this person was going to do. And so, people were like, oh, while I was over there, well, did you go get together with any of the witches? Did you, go to the stores and stuff like that? And I'm like, there are no esoteric stores here. There's like some spiritual stores, but it's like that mix of like very washed down, you're not quite sure what it is. It's got chakras and things like that. And, in it.
It's like a touristy part of.
Yeah. But if you really want to find un brujo, una bruja, you have to really like know somebody who knows somebody. And then you kind of go like through these back alleys and into, these places, and they have a tendency to move around a lot, because if the workings that they do for you don't pan out the way that you want them to, or people will come back like for their money. And so they like move around so you can't find them. So you have to know somebody to know somebody. And the other thing is too, it's like, you're not going to take out, like a public notice, like come here for, the workings, because people are scared, and, like I originally, when I went over it last year, I was like, oh, well, it's going to be Samhain, and I'll go online and I'll see if I can connect with other witches that are over there. It would be really kind of cool to talk to each other. And then I thought, no, I can't bring that kind of attention to the house.
Right.
I don't know what would happen if they found out that there was una bruja, staying there. You have to be really, really careful about that. It's like there's this, I called it like there's a respect and a fear for witches over there.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've learned, I've learned, so I was talking to my sister-in-law when I was first married. My husband and I had a little challenge, he had a little bit of a straying eye kind of a thing. And I mentioned it casually to my sister-in-law in conversation like this. It's always been an issue with him. And she was like, oh, come here, mija, I'm going to show you what to do. And so she taught me a few things to do. Some people would call them amarres, which are like bindings, love bindings. But they were more things like just to keep his eye on the path kind of a thing. And so what I did was I used what she taught me and I combined it with what I knew.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times when I do workings that have to do with our relationship or with him, like I want to do something to help him. He's been really stressed out or worried and I want to help him relax a little bit. I tend to use herbs or ingredients that they've taught me about that come from his country, because I find that sympathetic type of magic that, is a stronger bind for him.
Yeah, it's a closer connection.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So if I'm going to do a sweetening spell on him, if I were, I'm not using honey and I'm not using white sugar. I'm using panela from Colombia. If I were.
If you were.
Hypothetically.
Just as an example.
Yeah, just, if somebody were to do one.
So with the combining of the two practices, what do your holidays look like? Like your celebrations? Because in my house, I'm the only pagan. Everybody else doesn't really care. My fiance is agnostic at best. He's just kind of like, man, I can't see it. So like, if it's there, whatever. If it's not there, it doesn't matter. He's not a very strict atheist. And we've had conversations before. Usually when we're moving or when we're driving really long distances, we end up like having really deep conversations in the car. It's just a thing. I don't know why. But we've had conversations where we talk about the differences in belief, and he's asked me like really interesting questions. And he has been like, I think if I were to believe something, I'd probably be some kind of pagan, but I don't know. I can't see it, so I can't believe in it. And my parents are kind of Christian, I call them, because they don't go to church. They don't have any sort of Christian practice, but they believe in God and heaven and hell and that kind of thing. But it's, so where was I going with that? So my house is very, like traditional American when it comes to holidays. We celebrate the commercialized version of a lot of the holidays, like Christmas and Halloween and Easter. And I'm over here trying to celebrate by myself, like the different celebrations in my practice. So what does that look like for you in your household with the two different cultural practices?
Right. Well, there again, we have that fine balance. Your family is Christian by default, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And that tends to be the pretty much the feeling in this country is if you're not really decided, you're kind of Christian by default, so to speak, and celebrate the commercialized versions.
Yeah.
I do recognize like I guess would be like a Slavic wheel of the year. And in Slovakia, I think a lot of what we see online nowadays when you talk about Slavic witchcraft is either Polish or Ukrainian, because that's, those are the people that's, have had the loudest voices for, whatever reasons, different reasons. The invasion in Ukraine, or just, what people know here about Slavic is like pierogi, kind of a thing. So, but there are, those of us that are, that come from other Slavic countries that like my family. And, we recognize, the holidays, like the commercialized holidays, the Christian by default type of holidays. But there is this and I love this, that like they haven't let go of their roots, So in Slovakia, they celebrate basically the spring and the fall kind of. But what's quite interesting is that they celebrate like the fall harvest festivals at the end of August. And, being removed from Slovakia, a lot of times I'm like, right around that time, we've got a lot going on. People are back to school and things, and I have kids, like the youngest of mine is in university, but these were always busy times, and it would be like, oh shoot, I missed the harvest festival. So, and especially with you guys have the Celtic has Mabon, how do you say
Mabon? It's a word that comes from Welsh. I believe it's a Welsh god. I'm not sure. I just call it the autumn equinox.
Right. And I have, and I've used that. I love to use, have a cutting board, a beautiful cutting board that has the different Sabbats and equinoxes and all on it. And I use it, even though it has the Celtic terms on it, because for me, I use it more like an altar piece. I've consecrated it for the purpose of workings. And so that's why it generally stays on my altar and I use it. But, I know in my heart, like, I know that the Polish people celebrate Docinki right around this time, which is the fall harvest festival. And the Slavic people would call it Zhatka, which is like it centers, our people were farmers. And so it centers a lot around the wheats, the last harvests and bringing in the harvests and things of that nature. And so what I'll do being here is, I live in New Jersey. If I want wheat fields, I have to really kind of go down south. So it's not really part of my life at this moment. But what is part of my life? Well, what do we harvest here that we have a lot of? We have grapes, we have apples, things of that nature. And so when those of the year come around, I will do things with my family that feel like I'm honoring those traditions. Like every year we would go apple picking from the time that the kids were little, pumpkins, and we would bake and we would can. Plums are very big in our culture. And so there's a reel that I put last year of making canning plums in spiced plums for the winter time to have. Those types of things. And so I've kind of taken, and that's where the whole American part comes into the Slavic American practice, is taken the practices of my tradition, of my lineage that were taught to be by my grandmother predominantly, because my father wanted to really be American. So, it's funny now as he's getting older, he's starting to talk about some of these things that his mom did. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I already know that. I'm just like, oh, that's interesting, Dad. Tell me more about it,
Right, like I've already been taught this.
Yeah, but I can't let him know because, it was this whole, well, let me put it this way. So it's interesting working a lot in the Hispanic community. You have the generation that comes from the country that's all about, they speak the language, they have their culture, they listen to the music. And then you have the next generation who's kind of like in between, and they're kind of fighting. Like they still understand the language and all, but they don't want to listen to their parents' music, and they fight against tradition. And then you have the third generation who wants to be completely American. And that's where you get these people that, for all intents and purposes, look Hispanic, but say, I don't understand Spanish, or I don't speak it. You have the same kind of thing in every culture. Yeah. And so my dad was that generation where like he understood Slovak and he would speak it to me. the music and the traditions, but he kind of fought against it. And but now as he's getting older, he's starting to understand the importance of it. Whereas I've always had that feeling, like, because I had that tie with my grandmothers, and I was like, no, I'm going to do this and I'm going to practice this, you know? And so like in the springtime, I know a lot about the pantheon of gods too, even though I'm kind of somewhere in between my faith growing up as an Orthodox, you know, Eastern Catholic, you know, but at the same time having this interest. So like on my altar, I have the Blessed Virgin Mary, but I also have Mokosh, which would be the pagan version of the blessed. She is the goddess who Mary replaced, so to speak.
Okay.
So I honor them both on my altar.
I'm sorry. My daughter's calling me and she's supposed to be at a theme park.
Oh,
sorry for interrupting your train of thought.
I understand. I completely understand. I think we were talking about, you know, the wheel of the year and the holidays.
Yeah.
So, I mean, basically, because Colombia was such a Christian country, you know, they celebrate, I recognize those holidays for him. But they do have some extra traditions that we don't have over here. Like for them, the beginning of December, they have los farolitos, which is, I did a reel on it last year. I tried to like do reels so that people can see like different things that we do, which is like this whole beautiful tradition of the lighting of the candles. But it's a very Christianized holiday. The idea that you're lighting the path for the baby Jesus and the family to find their way into your home for December. And I did a reel on it last year. But what I do is I'll take his tradition and I'll do like, I'll burn some herbs that are traditional for them, you know, for cleansing and things of that nature. So I bring in those witchy elements to what he's doing as well, to kind of like help him tie back to his indigenous roots as well.
That's really cool. I like how you blend those together, because that's something that I struggle with here, like in my house, because like, what am I doing? Here I am. It's like Lunasa, or even today for the Equinox, as we're recording this, I'm going to go clean my oven and I'm going to bake some bread and I'm going to make like 3 or 4 loaves, because a lot of what my practice is about is community. And it's like, you have this and you share it with others. And like the people in my house are like, okay, cool, we'll have extra bread with dinner. I'm like, but it's a little like, it's more than that.
Right. Well, it's hard, you know, it's really hard. And with my husband, it's kind of been a very gentle education, because, you know, coming from this mindset that witchcraft and witches are evil, anytime I would do anything that would look remotely witchy. I mean, there was this one time that I did a sweetening jar that I had actually put in a bottom drawer of a cabinet, and his t-shirt was wrapped around it. And I don't, whatever reason, he decided he was going to look in that drawer for rubber bands, which I think is a total crock of shit, but he found this. And I swear to God, you've never seen, you know, a Latino man go whiter in your whole life. And he was losing his mind. You know, why is my picture in this jar? What is this liquid? Why is my t-shirt around it? And I'm relax. What are you doing? I don't like this in this house. And I was like, okay, I just let him, as they say to my kids, my girls, sometimes you got to let him kick the wall for a while. And then when he's done, then you're like, okay, can we talk now?
Yeah.
You know, when have I ever done anything that has brought harm to this home? You know, the big thing with him is like, I've got him into this evening ritual of having a cup of tea, and I make the tea. So, I mean, like, talk about a trusting relationship. He has no idea what I put in his tea. And one time I was like, you know, I only use mugwort in my practice. Like I burn it. Like I have a lot of sensitivities to herbs and things. So I never really drank it. And I was like, I wonder if this really does have the hallucinogenic effects that people say. So I made him a cup of mugwort tea to see. And the next morning it was funny. He's like, I had the weirdest dreams last night. They were so wild. And I was like, okay. So I made a note in my grimoire, you know, like, okay, so, you know, now I'm going to try it myself. Right. So I've had it, and, you know, like it really helps with like spirit flight and things like that, where I'll use it reading and stuff for clarity. But, you know, I kind of like, so I'm in the backyard and I'm gathering my own mugwort, and you know, he's calling it my marijuana, right? And I'm like, you really don't believe me that it does this, right? And he's like, yeah. And I go, you've had it before. And he was like, what? I'm like, yeah, need your cup of tea. Remember that day that you told me you had these really crazy dreams and everything? He's like, so you're experimenting on me? I go, yeah, sometimes. But you're my husband. It's in the ring. Anything that I want to get away with, I tell him it's in the fine print inside of his ring.
I mean,
Iron stomach. This guy's got a constitution. So I'm like, let me try it out on him and see how.
oh my gosh. Yeah, that's trust for sure.
But you know what? A lot of it's very interesting because the more we think we're different, the more we're the same. Like at the end of the year in Colombia, they have the burning of what they call el año viejo, which is the old year. So they make effigies that look like, effigies of a person or an old man, and they put them in the street, where they put them, if they make them small, they'll put them on like a barbecue, and they burn them. The idea being you're releasing all of the last year's memories and energies and things like that, so that you can then cleanse the house and welcome in the new year. Well, the Slavic people have the drowning of Marsana in the springtime. So Marsana is in Polish. In Slovak, she would be Morena, which is one of the goddesses that I've come to know and venerate. And she's the goddess of the winter, who was in all of their tradition betrayed by her sister, who is the goddess of the spring, Vesna, into becoming the goddess of the winter. She's also what would be closest to what the witches consider Hecate. And so a lot of people are afraid to work with her because they think that, she's like this cold and mean, she's usually depicted as like an old hag type of a witch. And so in Slavic tradition, they will make an effigy of her at the spring equinox, and they will drag, the tradition is you drag it through the town, and you don't look back on her so that you don't have bad luck, but you drag it through the puddles and the mud and everything, and you bring it to a bridge, you light it on fire and throw her over and drown her to get rid of the winter energies.
Oh my
so
gosh.
You have the burning of the old year in Colombia in December. You have a similar tradition with the Slovak people, and so we'll do like, you have to be really careful. You can't make a big gigantic effigy, but we'll do something small and we'll burn it out in the wintertime. And my husband, even though he has this very Christian by default energy about him, will say to me, you have to make he'll call her El Año Viejo, but we can burn it. And he's like, I still don't understand why we do it in the spring, but, he'll do it with me. So there's like this fine line. Or, for example, we live in a 2-family house. And unfortunately, about 2 years ago, gentleman downstairs passed, and we were very close with the family. When he got home, he knew that he had passed. I had the windows open, and on my ancestor altar, I had put this gentleman's name because I didn't have his picture, and I was burning herbs. And so he came in and said to me, "Oh, you're doing salmeria for the gentleman downstairs." And I said, yes. And he was perfectly okay with it.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So with your ancestor altar, it's funny because I have that written down here to talk about. Like, what does your ancestral practice look like?
So I really feel that the most important thing about having ancestral practice, so in Slavic, let me just back up a little bit. In the Slavic practice, we have duality, our ancestors and our land spirits. It's very tied to nature. It's very similar to the Celts in that sense that, we believe in land spirits, and we believe in the importance of ancestry. And so it's important for me also, being American, to know that I live on Lenni Lenape lands, and to, when we moved here, to understand and respect and ask the spirits of those that had come before if it was okay if I practice on this land. And I did that for quite a while before I actually even set up my altar and everything, to make sure that the spirits that were here before were okay with my practicing. And then, of course, there's my own ancestors, but also I bring into that my husband's ancestors. So on my ancestor altar, which you've seen in multiple postings and on Instagram, you'll see a mix of peoples on there, and also include some, family, friends, and members who were like family to us, who have passed on as well. And so there is that, there is that inclusion, and that, I don't want to call it petitioning, but it's also like, it's kind of like a petitioning. Like if I'm doing a working in particular that has to do with my husband, or his health, or, his mental attitude, or, a job coming through for him, that, I will include his father or his oldest brother, who have both passed over the veil, and ask them to, to intercede for me, or to work with me, or to help me with this particular working. And the same thing with my family members, or, if it's for one of my kids, unfortunately, each of them has lost friends. And so I will include them and be like, this is so-and-so's mom, I'm doing this for them. And can you please come down and intercede or help me with this? But a big part of my ancestral practice, and it's honoring or venerating, not worshiping, it's like a respecting. I believe that there are two parts of it. You can't just try to build a relationship with them once they've passed. If you've known them here on earth, it's also very important to build that relationship while they're here. And so my kids visit their grandparents on a regular basis. My son, while he's up at school far away, he's also serving in the military. He never misses to call his grandparents for their birthdays, for their anniversaries and things of that. There's that understanding and that respect. About a year ago, 2 years ago now, we went on a little, like a trip with him in October, my parents and my son and I. And I posted pictures of my son taking care of my mom and wheeling her around in the chair. I mean, like, we would go place to place and he would jump out and he would put together her chair and he would help her in. And never once did he complain. And, it's this idea that, you honor your ancestors by building those relationships now. And then afterwards, you visit the cemeteries, you maintain their site, their tombs and things, and you make offerings and things like that. And you have these conversations. So it's just this full circle of including them in the practice and honoring them through the traditions that have come down through the lineage as well.
I love that so much, because I think that's really important too, because you can't, like you said, it's not respectful to approach an ancestor altar and ask someone who has passed over the veil for help if you don't have a relationship with them. And like, it's the same. I have the same approach with the gods and with any other spirit that I may interact with or potentially interact with. And it's like, I wouldn't go to my friends and constantly ask for things and constantly ask for help if I'm never giving anything in return, whether that be my time, my energy, whatever help or anything like that. So I think that's really important. And I really like the way that you explained it.
Thank you.
Those relationships with people while they're living, we tend to forget that our ancestors are also the people that are still here. Like my grandparents, one set of my grandparents is still here, and they are still technically my ancestors. They still came before me. Just because they're alive doesn't mean that they're not my ancestors. And I try to do the same thing, like keeping those relationships going and calling them and talking to them on the phone, because they're like 2,300 miles away from me. They live on the other side of the country. So it's like, just those relationships is really important to keep if you're going to have some sort of ancestor practice. For anybody that works with ancestors, I always like to ask this question too, because it's like, it affects me personally. This topic is, how do you approach ancestors that you wouldn't necessarily like want in your life, if that makes sense? Because I have some family that we did keep a relationship while they were living, but it was basically like because I had to, but they weren't the best people. And so I find that a lot of people get hung up on this, like, well, if I have an ancestor altar, any of my ancestors can come, but I don't want these specific people here because like they weren't nice in life, or they didn't agree with the way that I lived or whatever. Have you had any experience with that? Do you like, how do you approach something like that?
I think that's a great thing to talk about, because I think sometimes what happens is that we tend to forget that these were people, and you see it a lot in people who practice cultural, are very folk in their practices, that they tend to romanticize their ancestors. And you have to remember that they were people just like me and you. They had their moods, they had their idiosyncrasies, they had their beliefs, whether they were good beliefs or bad beliefs, whether they were inclusive or they were racist. And so you can't romanticize people. And I have those people in my life too, that, like I went to visit them out of obligation, but I wasn't particularly fond of them, or, I wasn't crazy about the way that they thought. Just like now there's a lot of education, with some of our parents. Some of our parents grew up in, my parents are in their 80s, so my parents saw, civil rights times and things of that. And sometimes things that they'll say are downright like, Mom, you can't say that. That's not appropriate, and then I have to like almost educate my parents as to why, wrong, or, why would you say something like that? Well, I mean, you think about it, who were these people that came before them even, and it's always very important to understand the environment in which they grew up, the times in which they grew up, and what gave them the mindset that they had. So there are people that, I choose not to include, or there are some people that I think like, okay, well, I'll leave the door open to see if they're willing to come in and to have a discussion and to be educated even after passing. But I think that it's kind of like, if you think of it, I always think of my relationships with those that have passed as in a similar way of those that are living. If there's somebody that I really don't care for, I just don't invite them. I don't, like, I'm not going to be like, hey, I really don't like you, but would you like to come to my house for dinner?
Right. Yeah.
Or like I'll be formal with you. Like sometimes, especially if you channel or, you communicate with those that have passed, sometimes you can't help which ancestors come through, but you can always be very respectful and say, listen, until you're willing to have a conversation about this, that, or the other thing, and, talk about, changing that attitude, I can't have you in my house.
Yeah. And it's definitely not somebody that you would want to invite to help you in whatever you're doing, because I can think of a few people who would try to like get in the way of what I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, like there's some discussion, between people who work with those that have passed on about whether or not they maintain their personality after, they've passed on. And I've seen, attitudes come through with some of my ancestors, and I have to say, this is where it stops. This is the line. This is what I'll tolerate, and this is what I won't tolerate, kind of a thing. When I do workings, one of the things that I do, and now my oldest daughter is following, and so I'm teaching her a lot of these things, because she was like, well, my second daughter used to read, and she was really good at it. Her intuition is just so spot on. And then she got really scared one night because I think she didn't protect herself properly, and some things came through that really scared her. So she stopped. So now that I'm working with my oldest daughter, she's like, well, how do you prevent that? And I said that just in the same way that, you have to set your boundaries, here with people on this plane, you have to do the same thing with people outside of the plane, and so when I'm working in a space like that, where I'm really very vulnerable, I not only put down my own protections, but when I call in the people the spirits and the people that I want to work with, I have those that I call my spiritual bouncers. And so it's almost like casting a circle, where I ask those people in first to stand guard at the four corners for me, and only allow in these certain people. And in the time that I've been doing this, I've never had an issue since I started doing that.
Yeah.
And that's the way I work with ancestors as well. Now, the other question that I'd like to bring out that is, to hear what you think about it too, is that I'll have some people that will say, well, I was orphaned, but I know that, and I was adopted by this family, but I know that I have this Slavic ancestry. And so how do I work with my ancestors if I just have that, I'm starting from zero, and I always say that you may not know your ancestors, but they know you.
Right.
They know you, and they've been with you since the time you were born. And so I find that doing a lot of research and a lot of trance work and meditation, and it's going to take time, but you open the doors to them coming through in that respect. And you set your boundaries just show it you would if you knew them. But you have to do more meditation and more trance work to then say, I'm ready to connect. I know you've been here this whole time watching me, taking care of me, but now I'm ready to connect with you.
Yeah, exactly. And like, so my grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
who has since passed, she had binders and boxes full of genealogical information.
Wow.
She taught my mom how to do it. And my mom has some of my grandma's stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of stuff is online. And so I think like that would be dependent on the person that is trying to connect with their ancestors, whether or not they could do genealogical work.
Right.
Um, but I think too, what what some people don't realize, and this is just my perspective, is that your ancestors don't necessarily need to be the people that you're connected to by blood, because
Mm.
your family is your family.
Right.
And that can be the family that has adopted you, that can be your chosen family. It could be like I crochet, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like I'm a fiber artist. So I also consider that in like my bubble of ancestors, because as I am making a piece and like I am working with the knowledge that was passed down to me by my grandmother, who she is working from the knowledge that was passed down to her by whoever taught her, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And like all of those people had a hand in me learning how to do it.
Yes.
And so even if I'm not connected to those people by blood, like they are still a common ancestral link.
Yes.
Um,
Okay.
and
That's
then
beautiful.
when connecting back to like a culture that you don't really have any information on, like it's exactly like you said, it's going to take more work, and you're going to have to do the meditation and the trance work, and even just learning about the culture and the history can help connect more, or help you connect more with those ancestors, because it's kind of lifting a lifting a veil between you and them, because once you know more, things can start to make more sense. Your meditations might become more clear because you will understand the different symbols and situations that you might find yourself in during meditation or trance. So it's really like this entire process, I guess, of it's it's going to be harder for someone that is adopted or orphaned or doesn't know their family, but it's definitely possible. Like it's not something that you can't do. It's just going to
Yeah.
take more work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and I love the whole the way you put it about lifting the veil between the two of you, because when I started working with my my husband's father and his oldest brother, what was interesting was that there was like this immediate acceptance from his dad. I've had visions and communications, excuse me, spirit communications in my life since I was in my teens.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that I can control. I say it's kind of like tuning a radio. Some days that station comes in great, and sometimes you can't find it for your life.
Mm-hmm.
But his dad came to me before we went over to Colombia. And so there was this immediate connection. But what was interesting was that he was really, really close to his oldest brother. Even though my husband was the baby, he looked up to him, he admired him and everything. And he was killed. His life was cut short when he was in his 30s. It was horrible.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was a really tragic story. And the most tragic part of it was that they found him on my husband's birthday. So for years, my husband refused to celebrate his birthday. Yeah, it was really sad. And so I always wanted to connect with his oldest brother, because I figured, like he could help me get through to my husband on a lot of things. And it would be like dialing the spiritual phone, and nothing and
Mm-hmm.
nothing and nothing. And every time we go to Colombia, I would say to him, we need to go to the cemetery. And my husband's very accepting in the sense that, like, a lot of times he doesn't understand why I ask for things, but he'll go like, okay, we'll do, because it's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Now the cemetery where they're laid is a good 35-minute ride outside of the city. And it's a difficult situation, like to get a ride out there and everything. So it's a commitment,
Mm-hmm.
And I posted a reel showing part of the cemetery when I was over there, about traditions over there. Honestly, that's the biggest cemetery. Imagine the biggest cemetery you can imagine, and then multiply that by like three to five times. It's huge. It's huge. You can literally have like buses taking people around in
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's how big it is. And when you get there, you have to go into the office. Then you have to give them their name, and then they'll look the person up. They'll give you a number, and they give you a map with directions on how to find. So there was all of this physical barriers between this relationship, and then there was this spiritual. But I was very determined that I was going to try to get through to his brother, in one way or another, and I was going to give it a number of years, and then if it didn't work, I would just work with his father. But the last time that I went, there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, there were 5 of them. So I brought the third of them to the cemetery, the third person, and my other sister-in-law. And she hadn't been in over 20 years. But I convinced her that it was important that she go and everything. Well, she was the key. When we got to her brother's burial plot, I always close my eyes and I go into meditation, and I let them know that I'm there, and I ask if there's any messages that they have. And it was interesting having her there kind of opened the door. And the messages that I was hearing was like that he was confused about who I was to the family.
Mm-hmm.
And with her being there, and that kind of like started to clear things up. And it was like he understood then who I was. And then I started getting messages that he thought that he'd been forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And just reassuring him that you haven't been forgotten, that, you're on my ancestor altar, that I want to work with you, that, this is the situation, and who I was in relationship to his brother and everything. And then it was like a portal opened, and the messages just started like flowing in. And it's interesting that I really believe the personality transcends the veil, because just the way that the family had described him, like very accelerated personality, like as soon as he figured out who I was and he was open to working with me, like the questions started flooding in, everything from like, how's he doing, to what did they do with my record collection?
Oh gosh.
Because he was a huge salsa fanatic, and like he had, from what I understood, he had this pristine collection of records. And so like when that question came through, I just burst out laughing, and I turned to my sister-in-law, explained to her what was going on. She kind of knew this about me and said, do you know he had the nerve to ask me what happened to his record collection? Well, when I said that to her, she burst out laughing. And it was like the confirmation that she needed to know that I was for real, like she's like, oh my God, that's definitely him, And now what's interesting is that he doesn't come through all the time, but I can feel his presence a lot more, and it's given me somebody more to work with. So it's like, a lot of times you think like, I really want to work with this person, but you have to build that relationship the way that you would build it here. And for me, the key was that one sister.
Yeah. That's so funny, because like, and I think you saw my story on Instagram about watching the show New Amsterdam, and the psychiatrist came across somebody that was working at the hospital, and who was claiming to be a psychic, and he was helping people connect with other people that they have lost and helping them move through their grief. And the psychiatrist was like, that's absolutely impossible. Like, you have some form of epilepsy. And it made me so mad. It made me so mad, because that's something that gets dismissed about witches and spiritual people a lot, is like, oh, there must be something wrong with you. And there's no way that's true. And it just frustrates me so much. So I'm really glad that the experience that you had with your sister-in-law wasn't like that. And she was like, oh, like, okay, like I get it, especially after the record thing.
That's what's such a really cool thing about the Colombian culture is, like I said, they're the biggest Catholics on Sunday are, the biggest witches during the week, is that they all have that like going on. And so, and I really tried so much like to post a lot on the stories and things. And I included it in the YouTube video that I did on the evil eye, their tradition of doing a baño to get rid of the evil eye. And I said to her that I want to bring back the herbs to be able to do, un baño before New Year's with your brother. And she was just like, oh yeah, mija, come with me, and she took me to the market and introduced me to a lady there that this was her job. Piles and piles of herbs, and it said baños y limpiezas, cleansings. And she was like, what, like she asked me, what do you want to do? And I told her what the purpose was. And she's like, And I said to her, listen, I have to get through customs, so they have to be dried, and so she was like, okay. So, and she took me and I said to her, now do me a favor and write out the names in Spanish and I'll figure out what they are in English, so that when I do, this, so that I know what I'm using here, and so, I had the names in English. And what was interesting was that it's just a very, some of them were like local names for things. And so as much as I searched, I was like, what the heck is this? I couldn't figure it out until I called my sister-in-law. And then she started to describe, and I was like, that's mugwort. Okay. I know what but like, he was really excited when I came back and I was like, all right, I got it. I know how to do it. This is what we're going to do and everything like that. Cause he'd been feeling like jobs weren't coming through for him. And he was like, there's definitely something going on. And I was like, all right, well, he went out the day and I did what my Baba had taught me with the matches. And I was like, okay, yeah, something's going on here. It confirmed it in my tradition. And so then we did the cleansing for him, in his tradition. But I also did some of the things that my people would do with clay and things like that.
Yeah. That's so cool that everything just sort of like comes full circle and gets connected like that. And that you had access to that while you were there with your sister-in-law, getting the different herbs and stuff to help you with the cleansing for your husband. That's so awesome.
Yeah.
I want to experience something like that myself.
Well, I it's so funny because I'm really good friends with Bex from the Witch's Cookery, and she talked to go to Colombia, and my husband and his family was like, okay, whenever you want to come, you stay with us. And I'm like, yeah, when you're ready. So, so the offer's there. If you want to go, we'll go.
Oh my goodness. That's so cool. That's so awesome. There's one last thing that I wanted to ask you really quick before we kind of start wrapping everything up. One of the things that I talk a lot about on the podcast and on YouTube and even on Instagram is mental health. And it's like, I'm an open book when it comes to things like that and the way that my mental health has impacted my practice. I have seen one post by you so far on Instagram that I have seen personally. I don't know if you've done any other ones where you talked a little bit about mental health and how it has impacted your practice. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Sure. Your personal experiences, and maybe if you have any tips or advice for other people that might be going through the same thing.
Well, I'm far from the expert, but I was born in 1967. So this is the generation I come from where, mental health was still not really talked about. And from crazy was a, negative label that put on anybody that's struggled with mental health or were living with mental health conditions. And so it was really kind of hard when I started to really I'm not just having a blue day. This has been going on for a while and I'm feeling like I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to take a shower. What is going on with me? And realizing that this has been going on with me since I was in my 20s. And then finally, going and getting the help and, getting a diagnosis of having PTSD from some abuse that happened in my past, which then led to depression and, cases of anxiety. I've even seen, and working with counselors, but a little bit of OCD, I'll check my purse 3 and 4 times to make sure I have my keys. And I know I'll be saying, you put the keys in there. You saw yourself put the keys in there. So why do you need to check? Or I'm the last one leaving the house and I run back in and make sure that this is something my dad does too, to make sure that the knobs are all straight, so that there's no gas leakage in the house. And I'm like, Nobody cooked. Nobody was in the kitchen. It's fine. And yet, and like part of me is like, yeah, we should just check.
Yeah.
Thing. Um, so I think the post that you're referring to is the one where I openly talk about the fact that I'm such a sensitive person. And I think that this ties into the gifts that I have, that when you're sensitive on the spiritual side, a lot of times you tend to be sensitive on the physical side as well. And so I can't take medication. I've tried and I've had really extreme side effects from it. Like the side effects are worse than struggling with the illness.
Yeah.
I found that working a lot with natural medications helps me more. But there are, like it only goes so far. And then a lot of it, I have to find just ways to coping mechanisms to help me with it. Has it affected my practice? Yes, absolutely. I'm of the philosophy that your energies that you approach your altar with are very important in your workings. When you're doing something and you want a positive outcome, you can't be doing it and the whole time thinking, when am I doing this? This is not going to work, because that's the energy that you're putting out. So I will never do a working when I'm feeling sick, physically sick, or I'm struggling mentally, or, like if I'm in the bad mood, because that's not the energy that I want to put out. And so what I say to other practitioners that struggle is that, like, it's okay. It's okay if you have 2 or 3 months where your altar collects dust and you're just not doing anything because you're not in the right mind frame to do anything. But also, go out and look for the help that you need. There is no shame in taking medication as a practitioner. I always like to think that, it's like a wheel on a car. Like your wheel needs to be balanced for the car to run right. Otherwise, it's going to pull to one side or the other, or the wheel's going to wobble right off and come off the car, which could be even worse. And I think of your mental health this way as well, that I feel that I perform better as a practitioner when I'm centered and I'm balanced. And if that means that I need to take medication to do that, then that's what I do.
That's such good advice, because like, I'm like you, I have gone back and forth for so many different medications where like, yeah, it works, but also then I have this other thing that is just as bad and doesn't make me feel any better about the whole situation. So it like balances it out, and it's almost like it doesn't do anything because the side effects are just as bad. And even now, like I was recently diagnosed with ADHD instead of, or along with, depression and anxiety. And like the medications are okay, but I don't know. It's like, are they worth it sometimes? Like for me personally, for anybody else that they work for, obviously take your medication. It's one of those things that, like you said, people tend to shy away from, and there's a stigma. And there are even people out there who say that if you are a witch on medication, your magic or your power isn't as good as it could be. And I'm like,
I disagree. I think it's even better,
why?
because it's helping you center. It's helping you regain your balance.
Exactly. Like it's not our fault that we were born different, or we have experienced things in life that have physically changed the ways that our brains function. Like, that's not our fault. So yeah, I'm not one of those people that's like, you can't take medication.
No, not at all. I think the important thing to remember with mental health is that some of it is biological and some of it is psychological. My PTSD is definitely psychological. My depression is biological.
Exactly.
And so if you need to take medication to right those things, or as a coping mechanism to help you, what you're doing is you're bringing yourself back to 100%. And why would you want to be 100%? And I think in that sense, a witch who has who is living with these mental health conditions, taking your medication or taking your herbs or whatever you need to do, is making yourself that 100% that you need to be again, which makes your magic even stronger.
Exactly. So thank you again for being here and having this conversation with me. We've been We've been talking for a while, and it's been such a great conversation.
Thank you.
Um,
I love to learn from you too. So this has been great.
oh, thank you. That really helps my imposter syndrome, which I think we could have like a whole other conversation about that, maybe sometime
Oh,
in the future.
yes. Oh, definitely. Yes, absolutely.
So, for anyone that doesn't know where to find you, can you tell people where to find you online?
Sure. So I'm predominantly an Instagram witch. I've just really taken to that platform at Hearth and Besom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also on Threads when I
Okay.
remember that it's there. Same thing with Facebook. I've uploaded one YouTube video. I promise I'm working on it. I've got a little bit of things going on there. And so that's basically where you can find me.
Okay, awesome. And I will leave your links for everything in the description for those watching on YouTube and in the show notes for anybody that's listening to the podcast. Um, and yeah, thanks again for being here. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. And it was so wonderful getting to finally talk with you.
Likewise. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation between myself and Caireann. I know I learned a lot about Slavic American and Colombian practices and beliefs. Be sure to follow Caireann on Instagram at Hearth and Besom for more content from her. Follow the podcast on social media and subscribe to the newsletter. Become a member at roundthecauldron.com to get exclusive content, free downloads, and more. All of the links will be in the description and in the show notes. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will be back next month with a brand new special guest.